Reincarnation as memory feedback. Life, it seems, has a way of seeking balance. An unfinished chord will ache to resolve. A story cut off in its middle demands an ending. So what happens when a life is violently cut short? When a story ends in injustice and silence? Sometimes the lost story finds a way to tell itself through another. Reincarnation, in the cases we've seen, often functions as a kind of memory-based feedback loop, a means by which unresolved events in one life circle back into the world through another life. The child remembers not for the sake of nostalgia, but as if driven to correct an imbalance, to reveal a truth, to give an ending to a narrative that was left painfully open. We saw this in the case of young Samir, whose memories led his community to uncover a murder and bring the killer to justice. Because of a child's recollection, a crime buried in time was dragged into the light and finally resolved. Samir's past life memory served a clear purpose. It fed back information from the past into the present, catalyzing action. What had been a hidden atrocity became a solved case. Importantly, once that resolution occurred, Samir gradually stopped speaking of the past. By age 6, he no longer mentioned the man who killed him or the life he left behind. It was as if, having delivered its urgent message, the echo subsided. The feedback loop closed, and the child was free to move on. His story is not unique in this respect. In case after case, these spontaneous past life memories appear to serve as a corrective feedback, returning to address unfinished business. In Thailand, a boy named Niran was born with a strange scar-like birthmark on his chest and an intense proclivity for playing cops and robbers. As soon as he could speak, Niran began insisting that he had been a police officer, a man who was ambushed and shot in the very spot marked by his birthmark. At first, his parents were perplexed and gently dismissive, but the boy's persistence and the uncanny details he provided forced them to take him seriously. He remembered his name, Sakta, the town he lived in, and the wife and child he once had. He spoke of the day he died, an unsolved murder of an officer 5 years before Niran was born. His claims were so specific that eventually his parents felt compelled to investigate. When Niran's family took him to the town where this officer, Sakta, had lived, the little boy demonstrated knowledge no ordinary child could have. He recognized streets he had never walked and pointed out the exact road where he had been shot dead in his previous life. He then led his stunned parents to the house where he had once lived. There, upon seeing Sakta's widow standing in the doorway, the child ran to her joyfully, calling her by name. "Molly!" he cried, reaching out as if greeting a long-lost loved one. The woman, Meili, froze in shock. Her husband, Sakta, had indeed been murdered years ago, and now a child who knew things only Sakta could know was calling her by the pet name only he used. Overwhelmed, Molly wept, feeling for all the world that her husband had, in some impossible way, come back to her. But Niran's purpose in that town was not merely to offer a poignant reunion. It was to finish Sakta's story. The murder of Officer Sakta had never been solved. The killers were never found. The boy remembered more than just warm domestic details. He remembered the betrayal. When shown an old photograph of Sakta's fellow officers, Niran pointed at one of the men with a trembling finger. "One of them killed me," he announced. His family and the widow exchanged uneasy glances, for one of the men in that photo had indeed been suspected of involvement in Sakta's assassination, though there had never been enough evidence to charge him. Encouraged by Malay, Niran's testimony, if we can call a child's memory that, was relayed to the local authorities. Skeptical as the police were, the details the boy provided were too precise to ignore. He knew exactly how many bullets had been fired, and from what distance, and where the shooter stood. These were details of the crime scene that had never been released publicly. Under renewed investigation and pressure, the long silent suspect cracked. Faced with the impossible yet accurate testimony of a 4-year-old, he confessed to the killing. It turned out Sakta had been eliminated by colleagues as part of a cover-up, secrets and corruption that his murderers thought they had buried with him. They never expected the dead to speak. And yet, through the voice of a child, the truth came out. The case was reopened, justice finally served. Niran's memories, having achieved their objective, began to fade soon afterward. By age 7, he could barely recall the dramatic events he had set in motion. Like Samir, he was released from the weight of the past, once that past had been acknowledged and righted. It's a pattern that repeats with astonishing consistency. A murdered gold merchant in Myanmar returned as a little boy named Aung Min, who led his astonished parents to his old shop, now an abandoned building, and identified the men who robbed and killed him. Thanks to his detailed memories, including the distinctive appearance of the ringleader, a mole on the cheek and a missing finger, and facts about the victim's life, authorities were able to reopen a cold case. Under questioning, the culprit confessed, and a grieving widow finally learned what happened to her husband after 15 long years. In Nigeria, a boy's insistent recollections of being sacrificed by a secret cult not only exposed men in his village who were likely responsible, but also served as a dire warning, prompting the community to confront an evil that had gone unpunished and nearly forgotten. In case after case, memory becomes a messenger of justice, a feedback mechanism through which the unfinished business of one life is resolved in the next. Even when full legal justice isn't achieved, the feedback still provides truth and closure. In Italy, a young girl named Giulia began whispering mafia secrets in her sleep. She spoke the name Angelo with reverence and fear, later telling her horrified parents that she was Angelo, an underworld driver who had been killed for a betrayal. Giulia's detailed recollections, names of mafiosi, the location of her execution at a dockside warehouse, the method of disposal of the body, matched exactly the fate of a real man, Angelo De Luca, who had vanished in the 1970s. Angelo's disappearance had remained an unsolved mafia mystery for decades. The child's memories did not lead to a trial. Too much time had passed, and the killers were either dead or beyond the law. But they delivered something almost as precious: the truth of what happened. An old journalist, hardened by years of covering organized crime, turned pale when he heard Giulia's accounts because she described mafia execution methods that only insiders knew. She even named specific individuals involved in the crime, one of whom was indeed still alive in Palermo, known to law enforcement as a likely suspect in Angelo's disappearance. Thanks to this child, one more hidden story clawed its way out of the grave of history. Angelo's family at last learned in gruesome detail how and why he died. His story, silenced for so long, found a voice again. The feedback loop ensured that the betrayal and murder, though it went unpunished, did not remain shrouded in secrecy forever. Memory, in these instances, is not a passive residue. It is active, insistent. It reaches out from the past to correct the record or to cry out for justice. It's as if the very fabric of moral order had been twisted by violence and needed one more turn of the wheel to be restored. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote that truth passes through 3 stages: first ridiculed, then violently opposed, and finally accepted as self-evident. In the stories of Samir, Niran, Aung Min, Giulia, and so many others, we see a similar arc. At first, the child's claims are dismissed or ridiculed: fantasy, coincidence, perhaps an overactive imagination. Then comes opposition. The accused laugh, deny, attempt to discredit the child's story. But in the end, the evidence piles up: the skull with a bullet hole, the widow's recognition, the historical records, the matching scars, the confessions wrung from guilty lips. What was once unbelievable becomes undeniable. The self-evident truth emerges. This child remembers, and because he or she remembers, we now know what really happened. If reincarnation is real in these cases, it seems to carry a built-in impetus toward resolution. It is memory with a mission. And if reincarnation is not literally true, if one prefers to interpret these cases through some other lens, like ancestral memory or an inherited collective unconscious, the effect is still the same. The memory arises precisely where it is needed, to whom it is needed, to push the present toward settling the debts of the past. In this way, Reincarnation stories function as a cosmic feedback loop, a karmic echo that ensures certain truths are not lost to time. The dead, through the living, speak, and what they often speak of is justice. This has been an excerpt from Reincarnation Files by Sam Elliott. Check out Elliott's new book, Paranormal Imprints, for an in-depth look to how some ghosts leave a mark on reality. Paranormal Imprints by Sam Elliott is available now.